This is tricky because we don't have all the statistics given that the testing is not available, but we have a population of about 7 million people. At this point, again, as I mentioned, it's April 22nd. We have 5,400 reported confirmed cases, more than 200 deaths. If you're only looking at numbers, those really only affect 1% of the population. Meanwhile, we have more than 400,000 Arizonans who lost their job. Did we create, or did the state create, a new crisis in all this?
It is one of those great contradictions that if we looked at Italy, if we looked at China and other countries, the momentum is such that this is an unknown. This is not, we certainly want to hold the leaders' feet to the fire, but do we risk people's health to fend off an economic problem if the economic problem is short term? So the question I would ask you is, yes, because testing is so limited, there are many medical professionals who are saying until we get up to 100,000 tests a month, we won't really even know what the impact is. So does the impact get deeper? Does it get a little bit better? Until we really have the knowledge, it's hard to say. But certainly it looks bad right now because so many Arizonans are unemployed. And we went from a state legislature looking at a $700 million surplus to now a $1.5 billion deficit almost overnight. It looks terrible, but as many leaders have said, you have to think about the health of the citizens first, because if they're not healthy, they won't be able to spend in your business anyway.
Zach, those numbers are hard when you try to look at them from public health, but then look at it from an economic component. So how do we try to make sense of all this?
Right. First of all, I don't think that we look back on the recent past with any regrets. I think we made, in general, the right decisions to make sure we didn't have a bigger problem with the data that we knew we had. But I think we're seeing some preliminary data that points to Southern Arizona, at least, maybe having already peaked. We've seen Governor Ducey ask local hospitals to increase capacity. Increased capacity has happened. We're not seeing the surge that we thought we would. I think the middle ground approach is what I hope the governor will do, and that is take it, phase by phase by phase, start slowly reopening parts of the economy, making sure that people are still encouraged to go out with masks, that restaurants aren't as full, but to start slowly reopening. I think we have the capacity that if things were to surge a little bit, from the numbers that I see, I think we could manage it. I don't think it's keep it closed until we have more testing or antibody testing. I don't think it's reopened tomorrow, but I think we're pretty close, and I think so in Arizona at least is in a good position numerically where we can start the phase in approach that I just mentioned. I think it's in the middle. I don't think it's either or, nor does it have to be.
I agree with Zach. In an ideal world, if we felt like we had a little bit more information, it makes sense to gradually reopen, but that reopening probably isn't May 1st. It may be a little bit later. But the thing I keep wondering about is how much is the carrot and the stick? How much is putting out an artificial date and getting people amped up for that date and then having to amend it? That's a real challenge too, because again, we're in this unknown period right now.
Let's talk about local mayoral leadership, because early on we did see both mayors of Tucson and Phoenix sort of, dance around the issue with the governor and maybe force him to make some decisions that perhaps he wasn't ready for.
Right. My sense of things from what I'm hearing down here is that the mayor and council here in Tucson are going to try to align a little bit more closely with the governor. So I think where the governor moves, I think the city will move as well. In the beginning of this, I think the city of Tucson was moving further ahead than the governor. And that happened twice. And I think the city of Tucson had a good pulse on things. They moved in the correct direction about 48 to 72 hours earlier. I think they deserve credit for that. On the back end, I expect to see state and region be more aligned. I do know one city council office has already preemptively said we're closed until June. So maybe they know things that, again, we don't know and they aren't talking about it. But I expect to see a little bit better synchronization on the back end of this.
Steve, who's calling the shots?
Well, Lorraine, that's a great question because I think the governor is, for the most part, calling the shots, although he does have a lot of pipelines to the business community. We've heard a lot from Glenn Hammer from the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's been very aggressive, whether it's coming to nationally from the Paycheck Protection Program or from a local standpoint. And I think that what has happened now is we saw weakness in the business community before, and we're seeing more assertiveness there saying, yes, 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 unemployment is killing us. This is an economic downturn, but we need to be gradual. And I think the governor is hearing a lot of that in his ears from business leaders. I would say it's the governor's call with some influence from the feds and some influence in the business community. But ultimately, I do think he has the power and is going to assert it.
420,000 Arizonans out of work, $150 million in unemployment doled out. Is this sustainable, and for how much longer?
Yeah, I think we see state level and local level being really dependent on the level above it, and I don't think that it's sustainable. And I think we're in for an 18 to 24-month recovery period. It's not going to be great recession levels because we don't have a great recession. It's structurally different. But to me, in Pima County, I can't speak to Maricopa. This is going to be an 18 to 24-month recovery. I don't think enough people are thinking in that direction. I don't hear enough leadership speaking to that. But I think that's the reality, to get that many people back to work. And this has uncovered how the how some of the economic disparities, the socioeconomic disparities, it's all been exaggerated. We're going to see the kimono opened on that here pretty soon when we start to reopen. I think it's going to give us an indication of the long road that we have ahead of us for sure.
And to piggyback on what Zach just said, Lorraine, the key thing is going to be whether these small businesses can survive. If the loan programs, if we end up with 18 to 24 months, I'm with Zach. It's somewhat pessimistic, but it's not if these small businesses don't survive, because that's the core. The bigger businesses will survive, and they'll be able to rehire, but not enough people fast enough.
Let's say the governor makes some sort of announcement that says May 1st, Arizona goes back to business, perhaps the way Georgia is taking the lead on this. What becomes of Arizona? How is it different?
Well, Lorraine, the one concern I would have initially, frankly, is that we expect now, based on what we've heard earlier this week, the legislature is going to adjourn on May 1st and may take another several weeks off. The governor will probably call them into special session. It will not look good, to me at least, if the legislators who we've elected to be our representatives are not thinking they're comfortable going to work. So why would they send the rest of the state back to work? I think the governor might have to consider something like that, even by optics. It just doesn't look good.
Yeah, I think on the recovery front, I think we're going to have to explore things like public-private partnerships to fund everything from community education to economic rebuild to small business restarting. I think that the platforms that a lot of electeds campaigned on, are campaigning on, a lot of business focuses is going to have to be really redirected towards recovery, recovery, recovery. And I think, if we can benefit from some federal infrastructure funds, that's going to be helpful. But I think infrastructure, education, and economy are going to be the things that we're going to have to locally seed ourselves, and we're going to have to start doing it immediately, at least here in Southern Arizona.
Okay, making sense of the unknowns. My thanks to both of you, Steve Goldstein from KJZZ in Phoenix and Zach Yentzer from the Tipping Point in Tucson.